The cherished objects we had brought with us thus far were left behind in the train, and with them, at last, our illusions. Every 2 yards or so, an SS man held his Tommy gun trained on us. Hand in hand, we followed the crowd. An SS non-commissioned officer came to meet us, a truncheon in his hand. He gave the order, "Men to the left, women to the right." 8 words spoke quietly, indifferently, without emotion. 8 short, simple words. Yet, that was the moment when I parted from my mother. I had not had the time to think, but already I felt the pressure of my father's hand. We were alone. For a part of a second, I glimpsed my mother and my sisters moving away to the right. Zipporah held mother's hand. I saw them disappear into the distance. My mother was stroking my sister's fair hair, as though to protect her, while I walked on with my father and the other men. And I did not know that in that place, at that moment, I was parting from my mother and Zipporah forever. I went on walking. My father held on to my hand. Behind me, an old man fell. Near him was an SS man putting his revolver back in its holster. My hand shifted on my father's arm. I had one thought, not to lose him, not to be left alone. The SS officer gave the order, "Form fives. Commotion. At all costs we must keep together. Here, kid, how old are you?" It was one of the prisoners who asked me this. I could not see his face, but his voice was very tense and weary. I'm not quite 15 yet. No, 18. But I'm not. I said 15. Fool, listen to what I say. Then he questioned my father, who replied, 15. The other grew more furious than ever. No, not 50, 40, do you understand? 18, 40. He disappeared into the night shadows. A second man came up, spitting oaths at us. "What have you come here for, you sons of bitches? What are you doing here, huh?" Someone dared to answer him. "What do you think? Do you suppose we've come here for our own pleasure? Do you think we asked to come?" A little more, and the man would have killed him. "You, shut your trap, you filthy swine, or I'll squash you right now. You'd have done better to have hung yourselves where you were than to come here. Didn't you know what was in store for you at Auschwitz? Haven't you heard about it in 1944? No, we had not heard. No one had told us. We could not believe his ears. His tone of voice became increasingly brutal. Do you see that chimney over there? See it. Do you see those flames? Yes, we did see those flames. Over there, that's where you're going to be taken. That's your grave over there. Haven't you realized it yet? You dumb bastards. Don't you understand anything? You're going to be burned, frizzled away, turned into ashes." He was growing hysterical in his fury. We stayed motionless, petrified. Surely it was all a nightmare, an unimaginable nightmare. I heard murmurs around me. "We've got to do something. We can't let ourselves be killed. We can't go like beasts into the slaughter. We've got to revolt." There were a few sturdy young fellows among us. They had knives on them, and they tried to incite the others to throw themselves onto the armed guards. One of the young men cried, "World learn of the existence of Auschwitz. Let everybody hear about it while they can't still escape." But the older ones begged their children not to do anything foolish. You must never lose faith, even when the sword hangs over your head. That's the teaching of our sages. The wind of revolt died down. We continued our march toward the square. In the middle stood the notorious Dr. Mengele, a typical SS officer, a cruel face, but not devoid of intelligence, and wearing a monocle. A conductor's baton in his hand, he was standing amongst the other officers. The baton moved unremittingly, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left. I was already in front of him. How old are you? He asked in an attempt of a paternal tone of voice. 18, my voice was shaking. Are you in good health? Yes. What's your occupation? Should I say that I was a student farmer? I heard myself say. But this conversation cannot have lasted more than a few seconds. It had seemed like an eternity to me. The baton moved to the left. I took a half step forward. I wanted to see first where they were sending my father. If he went to the right, I would go after him. The baton once again pointed to the left for him, too. A weight was lifted off my heart. We did not know which way was the better side, right or left, which road led to prison and which led to the crematory. But for a moment, I was happy. I was near my father. Our procession continued to move forward slowly. Another prisoner came at us. Satisfied? Yes, someone replied. Poor devils. You're going to the crematory. He seemed to be telling the truth. Not far from us, flames were leaping from a ditch. Gigantic flames. They were burning something. A lorry drew up the pit and delivered its load. Little children. Babies. Yes, I saw it. Saw it with my own eyes. Those children in flames. It was surprising that I could not sleep after that. Sleep had fled from my eyes. So this was where we were going. A little further on was another large ditch for adults. I pinched my face. Was I still alive? Was I awake? I could not believe it. How could it be possible for them to burn people, children, and for the world to keep silent? No, none of this could be true. It was a nightmare. Soon I would wake with a start, my heart pounding, and find myself back in my bedroom of my childhood amongst books. My father's voice drew me from my thoughts. It's a shame. A shame that you couldn't have gone with your mother. I saw several boys of your age, going with their mothers. His voice was terribly sad. I realized that he did not want to see what they were going to do to me. He did not want to see the burning of his only son. My forehead was bathed in cold sweat, but I told him that I did not believe that they could burn people in our age, that humanity would never tolerate it. Humanity? Humanity is not concerned with us today. Anything is allowed, anything is possible, even those crematories. His voice was choked. I said, if that is so, I do not want to wait here. I want to run to the electric wire. That would be better than slow agony in the flames. He did not answer. He was weeping. His body was shaking convulsively. Around us, everyone was weeping. Someone began to recite the Kaddish, the prayer for the dead. I do not know if it had ever happened before in the long history of the Jews that people ever recite the prayer for the dead for themselves. Yigidah, Yikadesher, Shemer Rabbah. May his name be blessed and magnified, whispered my father. For the first time, I felt revolt rise up in me. Why should I bless his name? The eternal, the Lord of the universe, the all-powerful and terrible was silent. What had I to thank him for? We continued our march. We were gradually drawing closer to the ditch, from which the infernal heat was rising. Still 20 steps to go. If I wanted to bring about my own death, this was the moment. Our line had now only 15 paces to cover. I bit my lips so that my father would not hear my teeth chattering. 10 steps still, 8, 7, we marched slowly, on as though following a hearse at our own funeral. 4 steps more, 3 steps. There it was now, right in front of us, the pit and its flames. I gathered all that was left of my strength so that I could break from the ranks and throw myself upon barbed wire. In the depths of my heart, I bade my farewell to my father, to the whole universe. to the whole universe. And in spite for myself, the words formed themselves and issued in a whisper from my lips. Yukitara, Yukishara, Shame Rama. May his name be blessed and magnified. My heart was bursting. The moment had come. I was face to face with the angel of death. No 2 steps from the pit. We were ordered to turn to the left and made it into the barracks. I pressed my father's hands and said, "Do you remember Madame Schagner in the train?" Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp, which has turned my life into a one long night. 7 times cursed, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the little faces of the children, whose bodies I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath the silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence which deprived me for all eternity of desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to dust. Never shall I forget those things, even if I am condemned to live as long as God himself, never. The barracks we had been made to go into was very long. In the roof were some blue tin skylights. The antechamber of hell must look like this. So many crazy men, so many cries, so much bestial brutality. There were dozens of prisoners who received us, truncheons in their hands, striking out anywhere at anyone without reason. Orders: strip, fast, los, keep only your belts and shoes in your hands. We had to throw our clothes at the end of the barracks. There was already a great heap there. New suits, old, torn coats, rags. For us, this was the true equality. Nakedness, shivering with cold. Some SS officers moved about in the room, looking for strong men. If they were so keen on strength, perhaps one should try to pass oneself off as sturdy. My father thought the reverse. It was better not to draw attention to oneself. Our fate would then be the same as the others. Later, we were to learn that he was right. Those who were selected that day were enlisted in the Sonderkommando, the unit which worked in the crematories. Bela Ketza, son of big tradesman from our town, had arrived at Birkenau with the first transport a week before us. We had heard of our arrival. He managed to get word to us that having been chosen for a string, he had himself put his father's body into the crematory oven. Blows continued to rain down. To the barber, belt and shoes in hand. I let myself be dragged off to the barber. They took our hair off with clippers and shaved up all the hair on our bodies. The same thought buzzed all the time in my head. Not to be separated from my father. Freed from the hands of the barbers, we began to wander in the crowd, meeting friends and acquaintances. These meetings filled us with joy. Yes, joy. Thank God you're still alive. But others were crying. They used all their remaining strength in weeping. Why had they let themselves be brought here? Why couldn't they have died in their beds? Sobs shocked their voices. Suddenly someone threw his arms around my neck and embraced. Gil, brother of Rabbi of Saget. He was sobbing bitterly. I thought he was weeping with joy at still being alive. Don't cry, Akil, I said. Don't waste your tears. Not cry. We're on the threshold of death. Soon we shall have crossed over. Don't you understand? How could I not cry? The blue tingled skylights, I could see the darkness gradually fading. I had ceased to feel fear. And then I was overcome by the inhumane weirdness. Those absent no longer touched even the surface of our memories. We still spoke of them. Who knows what may have become of them? But we had little certain of their fate. We were incapable of thinking of any other thing at all. Our senses were blunted. Everything was blurred as in a fog. It was no longer possible to grasp anything. The instincts of self-preservation, of self-defense, of pride had all destroyed us. In one ultimate moment of lucidity, it seemed to me that we were damaged souls wandering in half-world souls, condemned to wander through space till the generations of man came to an end, seeking their redemption, seeking their obliteration, without hope of finding it. Toward 5 o'clock in the morning, we were driven out of our barracks. The capos beat us once more, but I had ceased to feel any pain from their blows. An icy wind enveloped us. We were naked, our shoes and belts were in our hands. The command, "Run!" and we ran. After a few minutes of racing, a new barracks, a barrel of petrol at the entrance, disinfection, everyone was soaked in it. Then a hot shower, at high speed. As we came out from the water, we were driven outside. More running. Another barracks, the store, very long tables, mountains of prison cloth. On we ran as we passed trousers. Tunic, shirt, and socks were thrown at us. Within a few seconds, we had ceased to be men. If the situation had not been tragic, we should have been roared with laughter. Such outfits! Merkach, a giant, had a child's trousers, and Stern, a thin little chap, a tunic which completely swamped him. We immediately began the necessary exchanges. I glanced at my father. How he had changed! His eyes had grown dim. I would have liked to speak to him, but I did not know what to say. The night was gone. The morning star was shining in the sky. I too had become a completely different person. The student of the tumult, the child that I had been consumed into the flames. There remained only a shape that looked like me. A dark flame had entered into my soul and devoured it. So much had happened with such a few hours that I had lost all sense of time. When we had when we left our houses and the ghetto and the train, was it only a week? One night? One single night? How long had we been standing like this in the icy wind? An hour? Simply an hour? 60 minutes? Surely it was a dream. Not far from us was there some prisoners at work. Some were digging holes, others carrying sand. None of them so much as glanced at us. There were so many dried up trees in the heart of a desert. Behind me some people were talking. I had not the slightest desire to listen to what they were saying, to know who was talking or what they were talking about. No one dared to raise his voice, though there was no supervisor near us. People whispered. Perhaps it was because the thick smoke which poisoned the air took one by the throat. We were made to go into the barracks in the gypsies' camps, in ranks of 5. And now, stay where you are. There was no floor, a roof, and 4 walls. Our feet sank in the mud. Another spell of waiting began. I went to sleep standing up. I dreamed of a bed, of my mother's cares, and I woke up. I was standing, my feet in the mud. Some people collapsed and lay where they were. Others cried, "Are you mad? We've been told to stay standing. Do you want to bring trouble on us?" As if all the trouble in the world had not descended already upon our heads. Gradually we all sat down in the mud. But then we began to jump constantly. Every time a couple came in to see if anyone had a pair of new shoes. If so, they had to give them up. No use opposing this. Blows rained down in the final reckoning. You had lost your shoes anyways. I had new shoes myself, but as they were coated with a thick layer of mud, no one had noticed them. I thank God in an improvised prayer for having created the mud in his infinite wonderful universe. Suddenly, the silence grew oppressive. An SS officer had come in, and with him, the order of Angel of Death. We stared fixedly at his fleshy lips. From the middle of the barracks, he harangued us. "You're in a concentration camp at Auschwitz." We paused. He observed the effect his words had produced. His face stayed in my memory to this day. A tall man, about 30, with crime inscribed upon his brow and his pupils and of his eyes. He looked us over as if we were a pack of leprous dogs hanging onto our lives. "Remember this," he went on. "Remember it forever. Engrave it into your minds. You are in Auschwitz. And Auschwitz is not a convalescent home. It is a concentration camp. Here you have to work. If not, you will go straight into the furnace, to the crematory. Work or the crematory. The choice is in your hand." We had already lived through so much that night that we thought nothing could frighten us anymore. But his clipped words made us tremble. Here, the word furnace was not a word of an empty meaning. It floated in the air, meaningless with smoke. It was perhaps the only word which I did not have a real meaning. He left the barracks. Couples appeared crying. All skilled workers, locksmiths, electricians, watchmakers, one stepped forward. The rest of us were made to go to another barracks, a stone one this time. With permission to sit down, a gypsy deportee was in charge of us. My father was suddenly seized with colic. He got up and went toward the gypsy, asking politely in German, "Excuse me, can you tell me where the lavatories are?" The gypsy looked him up and down slowly, from head to foot, as if he wanted to convince himself that this man addressing him was really a creature of flesh and bone, a living being with a body and a belly. Then, as if he had suddenly woken up from a heavy doze, he dealt my father with such a clot that he fell to the ground, crawling back into his place on all fours. I did not move. What happened to me? My father had just been struck before my very eyes, and I had not flicked an eyelid. I had looked on and said nothing. Yesterday I should have sunk my nails into the criminal's flesh. Had I changed so much, then so quickly? Now remorse began to gnaw me. I thought, only, I shall never forgive them for that. My father must have guessed my feelings. He whispered in my ear, "It doesn't hurt." His cheek still bore the red mark of the man's hand. "Everyone outside!" 10 gypsies had come on and joined our supervisor. Whims and truncheons cracked around me. My feet were running without my being aware of it. I tried to hide from the blows behind the others. The spring sunshine. Form fives. The prisoners whom I had noticed in the morning were working at the side. There was no guard near them, only the shadow of the chimney, dazed by the sunshine and by my reverie. I felt someone tugging at my sleeve. It was my father. "Come on, my boy." We marched on. Doors opened and closed again. As we went between the electric wires, at each step, a white placard with a death head on it stared us in the face. A caption, "Warning, danger of death." Mockery was there, a single place here where you were in a point of danger of death. The gypsies stopped near another barracks. They were replaced by SS who surrendered us revolvers, machine guns, police dogs. The march had lasted half an hour. Looking around me, I noticed that the barbed wires were behind us. We had left the camp. It was a beautiful day in May. The fragrance of spring was in the air. The sun was settling in the west. But we had been marching for only a few moments when we saw the barbed wire of another camp. An iron door with inscription over it. "Work is liberty. Auschwitz. First impression." This was better than Birkenau. There were 2-story buildings of concrete instead of wooden barracks. There were little gardens here and there. We were led to one of these prison blocks. Seated on the ground by the entrance, we began another session of waiting. Every now and then, someone was made to go in. Were the showers, a compulsory formality at the entrance to all these camps. Even if you were simply passing from one to another several times a day, you had to go through the baths every time. After coming out from the hot water, we stayed shivering in the night air. Our clothes had been left behind in the other block, and we had been promised other outfits. Toward midnight, we were told to run. Faster, shouted the guards. The faster you run, the sooner you can go to bed. After a few minutes of this mad race, we arrived in front of another block. The prisoner in charge was waiting for us. He was a young Pole who smiled at us. He began to talk to us, and despite our weariness, we listened patiently. Comrades, you're in a concentration camp of Auschwitz. There's a long road of suffering ahead of you. But don't lose courage. You've already escaped the gravest danger. Selection. So now you muster your strength and don't lose heart. We shall have seen the day of liberation. Have faith in life. Above all, have faith. Drive out despair, and you will keep death away from yourselves. Hell is not for eternity. And now a prayer, or rather a piece of advice. Let there be comradeship among you. We are all brothers, and we are all suffering the same fate. The same smoke floats all over our heads. Help one another. It is the only way to survive. Enough said. You're tired. Listen. You're in block 17. I'm responsible for keeping order here. Anyone with any complaint against anyone else, come and see me. That's all. You can all go to bed. 2 people go to a bunk. Good night. The first human words. No sooner had we climbed into the bunks than we fell into deep sleep. The next morning, the veteran prisoner treated us without brutality. We went to the wash place. We were given new clothes. We were brought black coffee. We left the block at about 10 o'clock so that it could be clean. Outside, the sunshine warmed us. Our morale was much improved. We were feeling the benefit of night sleep. Friends met each other, exchanged sentences. We talked of everything except those who had disappeared. The general opinion was that the war was about to end. At noon they brought us soup, a plate of thick soup for each person. Tormented though I was by hunger, I refused to touch it. I was still the spoiled child I had always been. My father swallowed my ration. In the shade of the block, we then had a little siesta. He must have been lying, that SS officer in the muddy barracks. Auschwitz was in fact a rest home. In the afternoon, we were made to line up. 3 prisoners brought a table and some medical instruments. With the left sleeve rolled up, each person passed in front of the table. 3 veterans, with needles in their hands, engraved a number on our left arms. I became A7713. After that, I had no other name. At dusk, roll call. The working units came back. Near the door, the band was playing military marches. Tens of thousands of prisoners stood in rows while the SS checked their numbers. After roll call, the prisoners from all the blocks scattered to look for their friends, relatives, and neighbors who had arrived in the last convoy. Days passed. In the morning, black coffee. At noon, soup. By the 3rd day, I was eating any kind of soup hungrily. At 6 p.m., roll call, then bread and something at 9 o'clock, bed. When we had already been there 8 days at Auschwitz. It was during roll call. We were not expecting anything except the sound of the bell, which had announced the end of roll call. I suddenly heard someone passing between the rows asking, "Which of you is Wiesel of Szeged?" The man looking for us was a bespectacled little fellow with a wrinkled, winsome face. My father answered him, "I'm Wiesel of Szeged." The little man looked at him for a long while, with his eyes narrowed. You don't recognize me? You don't recognize me? I'm a relative of yours, Stain. Have you forgotten me already, Stain? Stain of Antwerp, Rizel's husband? Your wife was Rizel's aunt. She often used to write to us and such letters. My father did not recognize me. He must have scarcely have known him, since my father was always up to his neck in his affairs of the Jewish community, and much less versed in family matters. He was always elsewhere, lost in his thoughts. Once a cousin came to see us at Saget. She had been staying with us and eating at our table for over a fortnight before my father noticed her presence for the first time. No, he could not have remembered Stain. As for me, I recognized him. I knew his wife, Rizel, before she left for Belgium. He said, I was deported in 1942. I heard that a transport had come in from your region and I came to find you. I thought perhaps you might have some news from Rizel and my little boys. They stayed behind in Antwerp. I knew nothing of them. Since 1940, my mother had not had a single letter from them. But I lied. Yes, my mother had news from her family. Rizel's very well, the children too. With joy, he would have liked to stay longer, to learn more details, to drink in the good news, but an SS came up, and he had to go, calling to us that he would be back the next day. The bell gave us a signal to disperse. We went to our evening meal of bread and margarine. I was dreadfully hungry and swallowed my ration on the spot. My father said, You don't want to eat it all at once. Tomorrow's another day. And seeing that his advice had come in too late, that there was nothing left of my ration, he did not even begin his own. Personally, I'm not hungry, he said. We stayed at Auschwitz for 3 weeks. We had nothing to do. We slept a great deal in the afternoon and at night. The only worry was to avoid moves, to stay here as long as possible. It was not difficult, it was simply a matter of never putting oneself down as a skilled worker. Laborers were being kept till the end. At the beginning of the third week, the prisoner in charge of our block was deprived of his office, being considered too humane. Our new head was savage, and his assistants were real monsters. The good days were over. We began to wonder if it would be better to let oneself be chosen for the next move. Stain, our relation from Antwerp, continued to visit us, and after time to time he would bring half a ration of bread. Here it is. This is for you, Lydia. Every time he came back, there would be tears running down his face. Viewing their freezing, he would often say to my father, Take care of your son. He's very weak and dried up. Look after him well, to avoid a selection. Eat. Doesn't matter what you eat, when you eat. Eat everything you can. The weak don't hang here for long. And he was so thin himself, so dried up, so weak. The only thing that keeps me alive, he used to say, is that Rizel and the children are still alive. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't keep going. He came toward us one evening, his face radiant. A transport just came from Antwerp. I'm going to see them tomorrow. They'll for sure have news. He went off. We were not to see him again. He had news, real news. In the evening, lying on our beds, we would try to sing some of the Hasidic melodies, and Akiba drummer would break our hearts with his deep soul. He talked of God, of his mysterious ways, of the sins of the Jewish people and their future deliverance. But I had ceased to pray. How I sympathized with Job. I did not deny God's existence, but I doubted his absolute justice. Akiba drummer said, God is testing us. He wants us to find out whether we can dominate our base instincts and kill Satan within us. We have no right to despair, and he punishes us relentlessly. It is a sign he loves us all the more. Herr Schneer well versed in the Kabbalah, spoke of the end of the world and the coming of the Messiah. Only occasionally during these conversations did the thought occur to me, where is my mother at this moment? And Zipporah, your mother is still a young woman, said my father on one occasion. She must be in a labor camp, and Zipporah is a big girl now, isn't she? She must be in a camp too. How we should have liked to believe it. We pretended, for what if the other one should still be believing? All the skilled workers had already been sent to other camps. There were only about 100 of us ordinary laborers left. It's your turn today, said the secretary of the flock. You're going to the next transport. At 10 o'clock, we were given our daily ration of bread. We were surrounded by about 10 SS. On the other door, the plaque, Work is Liberty. We were counted, and then there we were, right out of the country onto the sunny road. In the sky, a few little white clouds. We walked slowly. The guards were in no hurry. We were glad of this. As we went through the villages, many of the Germans stared at us without surprise, probably already seen quite a few of these processions. On the way, we met some young German girls. The guards began to tease them. The girls giggled. Pleased, they let themselves be kissed and tickled. Exploding with laughter, they were all laughing and joking and shouting in blandishments at one another for the good part of the way. During this time, at least, we did not have to endure their shouts or blows from the rifle butt. At the end of the 4 hours, we reached our new camp, Buna. The iron gate closed behind us.